you know, basically a scenario where we can't iterate and we say, you know, we need to match the capabilities of, you know, other products fully, you know, before we can really start using them. I also want to try to avoid cases where, you know, it's not a production use case. It's like we're kind of using it as a toy more than as something that is really, I feel like the validation and feedback will be better if people are really relying on it. And so, you know, I guess the question is, for question B, you know, what are there specific features that seem, you know, compelling to dog food internally, you know, as opposed that don't involve, you know, developing, you know, a very broad set of features before we can start iterating in that way.
Yeah, thanks for that. The thing I would think about is like monitoring. What's the first thing people think about with monitoring? It tends to be metrics, like seeing a graph of something. So I'd start there. Also, metrics, we've had them for a while now. They're pretty good. So the idea would be to get one metric dashboard moved. Now, I spent 2 minutes on our dashboarding site. Thanks for putting the question in before the meeting. And the prefect dashboard seems to be something that's in production that people are looking at, and that has only 2 graphs. They seem to be pretty simple graphs. I think the word to focus on here is moved. You want it moved. So not only do you want the new dashboard, you also want to deprecate the old one. So on dashboards at GitLab.com and .NET, you want to make sure those graphs are no longer there. And there's just a, hey, this has been moved. Now look there. And then take it from there. If you get that, you have one down, you have 300 to go. And at some point, after you've proven the first 10 that you can actually move them and that they stay up, you can say, hey, Jareer, can I get your support here that any new dashboard being made first has to be made on our new dashboard? And if it's not possible, open up an issue, make it in the old system, and link that issue. And if you don't link an issue and you create a new dashboard, we'll just remove it or we'll prevent you from making it or something like that. But all new stuff, either comply or explain, new system or old system plus issue. And when you get there, then you got this like steady inflow of new things. Over time, you'll get to like the new things will compose, the things since that change will compose about half, and then you can start trying to eat away at the old stuff.
Makes sense. So I work on moving some of the stuff and deprecating the old stuff, and then kind of a process change at the point where that's seen as viable to make sure all new stuff is going in there.
Yeah, and I think you talked about it pretty articulate. You don't want to do something big in one go. Ways to do this wrong is like, now not move a single thing and then go to the rear and ask permission for something. Like, look, you haven't proven anything. First, let me show that your new dashboards are any good. So before you can deprecate the old dashboards, you probably have to get some buy-in there. But don't ask for all new dashboards in the new system before you've proven you can move at least 10 of them. And don't first focus on getting new dashboards made in your system, which is like no work, then instead of moving people's cheese, where it used to be this dashboard and they moved it. And I love what you said.
To focus on new ones or not to focus on new ones?
First move 10, and after that focus on new ones, because old ones, it's like extra effort. Like it's working perfectly, and when you move it, you might break it in some way or break an alert you didn't know about or do something else you didn't know. So it's extra effort. So with the new ones, people have to make that anyway. So you want to get them used to using your new system. So instead of wasting effort by moving, it's better to just focus on the new stream. But right now, you're not going to get a single SRE wanting to use your new system. So the first few ones you'll have to do yourself.
Yeah.
And then very important, like make sure that it's in their OKRs. You asked about that. I think that's smart. Keep watching that. Make sure that end of this month, when the OKRs are complete, that it's in the OKRs. Bring it up to your leadership.
Will do. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gabe?
Hey, yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to do is build in better support for agile methodologies like Scrum. One of the constructs that's kind of principal there is recurring time boxes on kind of a consistent cadence, 2-week sprints, for example. The current proposal that we're doing solution validation on involves the notion of being able to assign an issue to more than one time box concurrently. And there's been a large number of users who've requested this feature, and in doing discovery with them, there's a lot of different use cases for why they want to do that. The most common would be sprints, but there's also the use case where you will be working within a sprint and want to track that issue against a larger quarterly objective within your team or something of the such. And so I just wanted to get your opinion on how we can best move from like the idea of what we have as milestones now to being able to support that kind of recurring cadence. Because if you want to do like capacity planning and whatnot, and programmatically measure the velocity of a given team, your time boxes also have to have a relation to each other, so you can carry, completion criteria from one to the next.
Cool.
Makes sense.
Thanks for asking. This is a nice one. I think we should take a bit of inspiration from a company called ServiceNow, and they probably added $10 billion in market cap by just changing labels. Like instead of calling stuff issues, they called it cases, and suddenly their tool was usable by a human research department because they don't deal with issue trackers, but they do understand case trackers. So without changing any functionality, is there something we can rename to make what we have now more acceptable to Scrum or XP aficionados?
It would be renaming milestones as sprints. A lot of the competitive tools have both in them, so I don't see that doesn't necessarily solve the problem of ultimately being able to associate two milestones as the same kind. Because right now milestones are open-ended, and that you can have a milestone be anything. You can have more than one concurrent milestone, but how do you determine whether or not they're related to each other so that you can then either programmatically move issues from one to the next or calculate velocity of a team over a given number of similar milestone types, if that makes sense.
What's the effort required to do the thing you talked about versus renaming it?
Renaming it would be trivial, but it doesn't solve the problem of people wanting to associate an issue to more than one concurrent time box.
I get it. But if it's a trivial issue, why haven't we done it already?
Because I'm exploring this now, and we could do that, but there's also the use case where a lot of teams don't use sprints either. So I think, I would say maybe about 70% of teams where they're doing project management within GitLab, it would make sense, but a lot of them don't as well. So
70% would prefer milestones and 30% would prefer sprints?
Well, I'm of those that would be project managers, 70% of them would prefer sprints.
So why do we call them milestones?
Because we always have, and I haven't made the change yet. It hasn't been justified. If that's the smallest thing to do to solve it, we can do that.
Well, if most people call what we call milestones sprints, we should probably call them sprints.
I agree. That's why in the proposal, it's leaving milestones, but also including a sprint type, which more or less.
Sure, but the proposal is much bigger, right? The proposal has all kinds of engineering work associated with it.
Correct. So
renaming sprint to milestone or milestones to sprint is like probably 10 minutes of work.
Yes, we can do that, but it doesn't, I guess that doesn't address the problem that I'm trying to solve, if that makes sense.
I totally get that.
Okay.
So I don't only have B, I have C, D, E, F, and G to talk about.
Okay.
But this is about iteration. So you know of a change that is trivial and would make most people better off.
Correct.
So that's what iteration is about. And what someone pays, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the interesting thing is having conversation with Marin and the release team. They view milestones currently as versions, and so that's where there's a different perception of what they mean to everyone, which is why it's also like if we were to change it, it would also have I feel like it would have an impact on how we work as a team as well. So
milestone, I can see that. I can even see, and I don't like options. I can even see an option like call it milestone or call it sprint. But I think the thing I'd ask for is like, is there an issue for that? Have we considered that? Just renaming it.
I think it's a great idea. It would have been part of what the effort would be of this work, but if that's the first thing to do, then I'm fine. And then you can just inverse it with having milestone be the thing that you add later.
Exactly. Well, the first thing to do is the thing that requires the least effort.
That's good feedback.
And someone faced an issue is, hey, we also have an issue to have customizable names for items. That would be the third thing I'd reach for. So the first thing would just be rename it. Like if more people use sprints, or if the people who use sprints are much more opinionated about the name, let's just rename it. The second thing would be, well, if we're not clear about it, if people want an option for this name, okay, I don't like options, but have a toggle switch. Allow people to toggle it between two different names. And then the third thing would be allow people to add their own name for this, like to totally rename it. So that would be my kind of, in those three things, it will be my last resort.
That's good feedback.
Yeah, thanks for that. As in always with iteration office hours, strong opinions, loosely held. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just trying to give you ideas. WWJD, what would Jira do? How does this work in Jira?
Jira has the concepts of releases, and then they have the concepts of sprints. You're able to toggle it on and off if you want to use either or. It's sort of similar to what we proposed. And then they also, I believe, have milestones as well. And they are used for a plethora of different ways, depending on how a team likes to do project management. But they have, you can set up a recurring sprint schedule. You can also say that an issue is part of, or a ticket is part of a given milestone, which is usually like a point in time. And so they use sprints for the recurring cadence. They use milestones for significant events. And then they also have the concept of versions and then release reports.
Have you considered doing the same thing Jira does?
Yes, I've considered that.
It doesn't look like we're doing that.
This is iterating towards that is what I was trying to get to.
Okay, we're not doing anything. It's not as far along the path, but it's exactly the same path.
Close. Supporting the same business use cases, if that makes sense.
Okay, but what is the biggest opportunity we have in plan, business-wise?
Taking 34% of the market share away from Jira.
Exactly.
Yep.
So what do we need to get there?
Some way for teams to have recurring time boxes that will. Sure. The smallest thing that we can get is recurring time boxes that can measure velocity. For sure. In all of the interviews I've had, that's been the one thing that people need. For
sure. We also probably need enforced workflows. So probably need multiple things. But what we also need is high fidelity imports, where people could import from Jira to GitLab and not lose anything, because everyone's already using Jira. So it's not enough to have a good product here. We need to be able to kind of match every single feature of that product. And if you do an import, it all should still work. And I think that's a much higher bar than saying, well, it supports the same business use case. That can be the case, but if it kind of works different and our importer can't automatically accommodate for that, people aren't going to switch.
do you think matching Jira one for one from a feature standpoint is valuable, or supporting importing in a way, but we have a better value proposition from a project management standpoint, like differentiation?
Differentiation by itself is not helpful. Differentiation, if Jira got something really wrong and we can do it better, sure. But I think we need high conviction before concluding that. They've been in this game a lot longer to get a pretty well thought out product. I think it's a bit sluggish, but that's a whole different thing. So I wouldn't differentiate for the sake of differentiating. I think everything you do different than Jira is just going to cause our future customers a world of pain when importing. And we're seeing with repositories how hard it is to get a perfect importer.
The biggest complaint is the complexity of Jira. And I think that's where, for all the things it can do, that's the reason why people don't like using it. And so,
sure. Is your proposal less complex than how Jira does it?
I think it is. It's the simplest that would enable, when importing, the proposal is default off first for two of the other time boxes, and then if importing and they exist, we could toggle them on by default as part of that process and map them to those objects. Which seems pretty simple to me, but
cool. You talk about a quarterly objective. Should people do that in an epic, or should they be like create a time thing for that?
Yeah, I was talking to John Jeremiah earlier today, and he was showing me how he uses milestones, and he creates a milestone for an epic as well as using an epic, because we don't have the same level of reporting on an epic that is on a milestone. That would be helpful. And I think that's where there is a little bit of an overlap there. And I would like to figure out how to better define what each thing is used for in which situation, so that we can not have overlapping solutions. But an epic can span more than a quarter. It can be like, it's a business outcome, in my opinion, and a milestone is a time box thing. That's cool. Why they're different.
Cool. So I'd be able to view all epics attached to that quarter.
Correct. You can do that now. I mean, you can go to a roadmap and look at that. And if we did also include epics and epic progress within a milestone report, that could be useful to see what progress was made and how it changed from the start to the end of that period. I could see value in that, because I think that's what a lot of customers want, is they want to know the narrative of what happened simply by looking at a few charts. Like how much scope was added, how much was removed, how much was carryover from the previous one, did we meet our commitments or not? Those sorts of things.
That makes sense. You thought about reusing releases, because we already have the concept of releases.
Yeah, I talked to Jackie earlier this week, and that's one of the things that we talked about, is how that's one area where we do have the opportunity to do a value-added differentiation, because we are a single application for DevOps, and being able to have the custody chain from an issue to a merge request all the way through is a pretty big deal. And she's working on making releases so that they can be scheduled into the future and also have a time box and bringing issues into there. And so I think that would be a good thing to do, is to make that a first class part of like issue management, as well as being able to assign it to a version. But it's almost like it's so similar, that where she's going with that is so similar to milestones, that like we want to make sure that we don't duplicate effort, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm glad that's on your radar. I've heard some complaints about doing not being removed as a label when dragging issues to done.
Not surprised.
You commented as well. What's up there?
It's the same thing of equal complaints, that automatically removing labels when issues close is confusing. I think there's an issue also that messes up insights reporting when labels are removed after the fact, and I need to investigate that a little bit further. It just came up this week. But there's some folks who are in the camp of you shouldn't automatically do things to my issues without giving me the ability to turn that off. And then there are others that would prefer that from a workflow standpoint. There's also a discrepancy in how label removal works from a issue board standpoint versus updating the issue manually, like within the issue, or closing it from a merge request. The only way that label removal automatically happens now is if you move an issue from the last issue list before it's closed into the close state from an issue board, then it will remove a label. And I believe it's only scope label. It might work for non-scope labels too. I need to verify that. But there's there's not standardized behavior there. And so I think there is a proposal. It's got a lot of backing to add the ability to configure a label to be removed when an issue closes. And then we remove all the magic that we do behind the scenes. But that's getting into configuration over a convention, which isn't great. And then there's also the problem.
Wait a second. Didn't we invent scoped labels to solve this problem where if an issue said of only one variant of a label, we gave it a scope label?
Correct. Yes. But there's the complaint now that when on a board, if you move a scope label into done, it doesn't remove that scope label automatically. And people want that to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of why we invented scope labels, right? So that they can have only one. So why don't we saying, hey, okay, automatically removing labels when dragging and dropping, we can only afford to do that on scope labels because those are labels explicitly there can be only one label of this kind on the issue. Why don't we move towards that?
We can, but you would have to, if you want to have them removed automatically, when an issue is closed, you would have to be able to say the linear order, the progression that scope labels would go through. So almost like a workflow. And then after that, you can say the last scope label in the workflow, when the issue is closed, then we can remove it. But depending on the context in which you update the labels, right now impacts the behavior of whether or not that label is removed, which is the tricky part.
Yeah, this is something where we should probably have a look at how Jira does enforced workflows as well.
Yeah, that's on my radar to start investigating. I've done it a little bit. They have different stateful conditions that you set for each workflow state that it can go through and things that have to be met. So one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of iteration is we have custom cycle analytics, or being able to define custom stages within cycle analytics and pulling out that customizer to use as a basis for defining your workflows. And then within that, you could set the conditions. And then you could still have your cycle analytics report on that. That was one small thing I was thinking about doing to at least bootstrap the custom workflows process. But
what do you think about
that path?
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna say, if you do go down that path, you could at least simplify by not saying you have to define the entire workflow and sequence of everything. You just need to define the last one. And when I move it to done and it's closed, you would add a new label, and then that would take off all the other labels, but you'd have a stage : done that would automatically trigger when you close an issue. That would be the simplest automation to at least solve that one problem.
That would help. And also there's been a lot of teams who report they can't use tracking and epics and things within our product because their done state is not closed. Their done state happens before, and then they hand off the issue to another team. So if the epics aren't ever reflective of the true status of their involvement in that given issue. So that could be an interesting thing to do.
We obviously simplified a long time ago by saying done means the issue is closed, but that isn't actually how all workflows work.
Yeah.
Ooh, interesting things. I think, what is something simple we can do here? Because if I'm setting up this board, by default, I still get this question. Now, first of all, I don't like to get a question on this state. I'm just trying to use a board. I should probably be prompted to create an issue, not to add this. These aren't scoped labels, so they're we have scoped labels for kind of the issue status. and we're not using them ourselves here. Should we start moving this to scoped issue labels, or?
The problem is scope labels, I think, are now in premium and issue boards are in core. And so this is like, we would have to take into consideration the widest applicable use case or show a conditional depending on tier.
Let's move scope. No one understands even what scope labels are. We made that up ourselves. Shall we just move that to core and simplify this whole situation? Because this is getting way too complex.
I would love to.
Okay, well, great. Have you tried and failed at it, or what's happened?
I think I made a proposal at one point to drop that, as well as assigning multiple people to an issue to core. That's one of the biggest stewardship issues that I've been tracking.
Ooh, but assigning multiple people, I think that's in a whole league of its own. Did you make an issue specifically for the scope labels?
I surfaced it, and I think I discussed it with Eric very briefly, just via back and forth in an issue, but I didn't pursue it. I also brought that up my second week at lab, so I was a little bit unsure of it, but cool. I think it's a good idea to move it down. Let's
have a go at that, and let's make sure we're using scope labels where it's appropriate, and we're suggesting that. And then you do me a big favor if those scope labels just are created by default, so people don't even have to think about it.
How do we handle including things like that if they were to go back and delete those labels that we're suggesting be the defaults? Like if you...
Great, you just delete that swim lane doesn't have any issues, or you also remove the swim lane.
Cool, I can do that. The other question, what's the best way to handle, is it going back to saying like defining which last scope label it is in your workflow that you would want to be removed, or how do you think is best to approach the discrepancy between how things are removed on an issue board versus how they're removed when you close an issue manually?
I don't understand your question. I'm probably not qualified to answer your question, but I could see that for any scoped label type you have, and then I mean not for every scope you have, you get an issue board for that. So if I have 3 labels with the same scope, there are going to be 3 swim lanes on an issue board with that scope.
Makes sense.
Gabe, can I just throw out something? This may not work in the slightest, but what if you actually went the other direction and removed the done column altogether and just said, you've got an issue board, you want to drag things, you got to make your columns however they are, and just whatever you want to make your last column as, you make your last column that and give it your own label.
And then, I would like that a lot. And then you could maybe specify that that's when issues are done for reporting purposes as well within milestones and whatnot.
I mean, like even going even more extreme, the idea would be like issues potentially just didn't get closed. Like there's no difference between open and closed anymore. It's you just move you move the labels to the right. Like if I think back of Trello, there's a difference between moving it to the right-hand column and then deleting it from the board is actually a completely separate action that you'd archive maybe once a week. You'd archive all of them or something like that, but it's a completely orthogonal operation.
That's how I used Trello when I did it, is we would archive once a week after we did our retrospective. So that's a really good idea. Cool. I think I'm good, and I really appreciate the collaboration. This is very helpful for me.
Thanks for indulging me. Farnoosh?
Hi. Yeah, so I don't have a specific issue in mind, but as I'm getting my feet wet here, one of the things I've noticed and I would like to iterate on with the team is how we start thinking about adding goals and metrics to our issues so that we can measure our outcomes more precisely. So once we've successfully broken down a thing to its smallest parts, which is fantastic, and we push it through, and we've built something, how are we really thinking about what kind of feedback we want to see from the user base, whether it's utilization, so on and so forth. So I would love to just hear your thoughts, a little bit of history on this. Mark and I had kind of a virtual chat about it. He gave some helpful insights earlier this week as well.
Yeah, thanks. Certainly something we should do more of. And I think what we should get better at measuring is active monthly active actions or action. I think action monthly active users. Maybe someone can consider updating the handbook.
That would be me.
Thanks. Don't want to necessarily cause you extra work, but measuring how many unique users used a certain action. And every time we improve something, we hope that gets better. So if we suppose we do what we just discussed. So we change issue boards. By default, we give them scope labels. We don't make them press a button. And then every time you move something that has a scope label that gets changed, you're counted as an active user.
Mm-hmm.
And then we aggregate that. And then hopefully those improvements lead to more, let's call the action scoped label, drag and drop change or something like that. There's a better word for it. And then as an organization, we're not ready to measure at that level of granularity. Right now, it's already cool if we had some metrics on board monthly active users who did something at an issue board. That would already be a big improvement.
Right.
And I'm getting a weekly report from Sid Ready trying to make the usage ping at least be more representative of that.
I mean, I think it's helpful, it can seem like a pretty big and daunting task when it hasn't been done consistently in the past. And also I agree that we might not be necessarily have the maturity or the access to all the data we need. But actually there's a point that Mark made. I think if we start just doing this and we have kind of like a North Star in terms of a KPI to think about, right? Then we at least start trying and we start revealing the gaps we have as well in the data we need to start it. I think that would be for me, seeing us make that stab at it with the right North Star kind of KPI is a great first iteration, even if we don't nail it immediately.
Yeah, I think it would be super helpful. We now have parts of the product that are not used as much as they should because we don't allow people to migrate from Jira. Our planned stuff is not used in the big enterprises because we hardly have CD. We don't even use our own metrics. Our incident response, I suspect it has a very low usage rate. And there's teams doing amazing work there, but they're probably doing it for a very, very small audience. And Jira import is not as high on the priority list of plan as it should be. And by showing the numbers, like this is how much people use create, this is how much they use plan, and this is what's and then everyone can figure out, okay, this is what's in between. We have great importers for GitHub and for Bitbucket. We don't have them for Jira. Okay, let's make that first. Because even if you have 100 users, they'll have more feature requests than you can ever fulfill. But we need to keep our eye on the ball, and that is like getting to millions and millions of users.
This is helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for asking. Anybody else?
No, but if it's okay, if I hop in here, kind of in response to Farnoosh, one example of where we, implemented something similar in using iteration was in job families. We wanted to make sure that all job families have performance indicators, and we still do. But when I was talking through how to do that with Sid, he suggested to me that the first thing we could do was make sure that no new job families were added without performance indicators. And so that way, things weren't getting worse, and eventually job families would get edited and as they were edited, we could make sure that they were just getting better. And so I would suggest keeping something very similar in mind, where it's like, what, you know, what's in place is in place and is done, but like, let's make sure that the next thing we roll out is a little bit better in terms of the standard it sets for everything else.
Yeah, 100%. Great suggestion. Thank you.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks everyone for attending Iteration Office Hours. Have a great day.